I'm Kelly, 22 female. For the first 22 years of my life, I lived in a house that wasn't really a home. It was more like a long-term, unpaid internship where my job description was daughter, but my actual duties were built-in babysitter. The story I'm about to tell you is about how I finally resigned from that position and, in the process, brought down the carefully constructed fantasy my parents called a life. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, I was the product of my mother's first brief marriage. My biological father was a ghost, a name on a birth certificate and nothing more. When I was 3, my mom, Brenda, married Richard. He adopted me, gave me his last name, and for a little while, I thought I had a real family. Richard was a charismatic real estate agent who could sell a haunted house to a family of skeptics, and Brenda, my mother, was his masterpiece. She was beautiful, poised, and utterly dedicated to crafting an image of domestic perfection. They were the perfect couple, living in the perfect suburban house with their perfect daughter. Then, when I was 13, Jacob was born, and 2 years later, Sophie came along. That's when my role in the family shifted. I went from being their daughter to being their live-in childcare solution. It was never a conversation, it was an assumption. Kelly, watch your brother. Kelly, can you get Sophie from school? We're going out Saturday night, so don't make any plans. These weren't requests, they were decrees. My teenage years were a blur of diaper changes, homework help, and bedtime stories for my half-siblings, while my friends were at football games and parties. I loved Jacob and Sophie, I truly did. They were sweet kids who didn't ask for any of this. The resentment wasn't for them. It was for my parents, who saw me not as a person with my own dreams, but as a convenient, free resource to enable their lifestyle. Their social life never missed a beat after having 2 more kids, because I was always there to pick up the slack. Brenda had rebranded herself from a stay-at-home mom into a lifestyle influencer. Her social media was a curated gallery of pastel-colored perfection. Photos of her baking organic cookies with the kids, after I'd already prepped all the ingredients, decorating the house for holidays, with decorations I'd spent hours untangling from storage bins, and enjoying romantic date nights with Richard were all accompanied by hashtags like blessed, family first, and perfect life. She had a modest but devoted following of other suburban moms who lapped it up, leaving comments like, "You make it look so easy," and family goals. It was all a lie, and I was the invisible stagehand making the magic happen. Richard, for his part, enabled it all. His job was to be the doting provider, showing up for the photo ops and praising Brenda's incredible ability to do it all. He saw my sacrifice as my duty, a small price to pay for the roof over my head. "We give you everything, Kelly," he'd say if I ever dared to complain. "The least you can do is help your mother out." My escape was art. I poured all my frustration and dreams into my sketchbooks and digital designs. It was the one part of my life that was truly mine. I worked hard in high school and managed to get into a decent local college for graphic design, but I had to live at home to afford it. The unspoken contract continued. My tuition was covered, and in exchange, my free time belonged to them. I scheduled my classes to fit their needs. No early mornings so I could do school drop-offs, no late evenings so I could handle dinner and bedtime. My social life was non-existent. My best friend, Liam, whom I'd known since middle school, used to joke that scheduling a coffee with me required a formal request submitted 2 weeks in advance. He was a tech guy, logical and straightforward, and he saw the dynamic in my house for exactly what it was: exploitation. "They're using you, Kel," he'd say, his expression serious. "This isn't normal." I knew he was right, but I felt trapped. Every attempt to set a boundary was met with guilt-tripping of epic proportions. "After all we've done for you," Brenda would say, her voice dripping with disappointment, "we thought you loved your brother and sister." For 4 years, I gritted my teeth and endured. College was my finish line. A degree meant a job, and a job meant money, and money meant freedom. I spent every spare second, usually late at night after the kids were asleep, honing my skills and building my portfolio. I became proficient, not just with the design software, but with the art of functioning on 5 hours of sleep. I applied for dozens of internships and entry-level jobs in my final semester, tailoring each application with painstack. In care, the rejections were disheartening, but they were nothing compared to the dread of staying in that house a moment longer than necessary. Finally, I got a call. It was from a small but prestigious marketing firm downtown called Innovate Creative. They were impressed with my portfolio and wanted to bring me in for an interview for a junior graphic designer position. It was a real, salaried job with benefits. It was a lifeline. The interview was a terrifying, exhilarating blur. I put on my one good blazer, practiced my answers with Liam over video chat, and walked in with a confidence I didn't feel. But as I talked about my work, my passion, something shifted. I wasn't just Kelly the babysitter, I was Kelly, a designer. They seemed to see it too. A week later, I got the email. "Dear Kelly, we are pleased to offer you the position." I read the words 3 times, my heart pounding in my chest. I started crying, not from sadness, but from a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief. I had done it. I had built a door, and now I had the key. All I had to do was walk through it. That evening, holding the printed offer letter in my trembling hand, I went downstairs to tell my parents I was finally free. I was naive enough to think they might be proud. The air in the living room was thick with the usual evening cocktail of laundry detergent, the faint scent of the chicken I had cooked for dinner, and the low hum of the television. Richard was on his recliner, scrolling through his phone, while Brenda was on the sofa, editing a photo of Sophie holding a dandelion for her social media. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, a scene she would probably caption with something vomit-inducingly sweet. I stood in the doorway, clutching the offer letter like a holy relic. My heart was a drum solo in my chest. "Mom, Richard," I said, my voice a little shaky. They both looked up, their expressions a mixture of impatience and mild curiosity. It was the look they gave me when I was about to ask for something that would inconvenience them. "What is it, Kelly? We're trying to relax," Brenda said without looking up from her phone. "Did you finish the kids' laundry for school tomorrow?" I took a deep breath. "I have some news, some really good news." That got their attention. Richard muted the TV. "I got a job," I announced, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like years. "I got a full-time position as a junior graphic designer at Innovate Creative. It starts in 2 weeks." For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in Richard's eyes that might have been pride, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a calculating look. Brenda, however, didn't even pretend. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitted together in a frown. "A job? What do you mean a job?" she asked, as if I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. "A 9-to-5 job downtown," I clarified, my smile faltering. "It's a great starting salary, and it's exactly what I went to college for." Richard leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Downtown, huh? That's a long commute. What about your responsibilities here?" The word responsibilities landed like a stone in my stomach. He didn't mean my laundry or keeping my room clean. He meant Jacob and Sophie. Brenda set her phone down, her full attention now on me. Her expression was hardening. "Who's going to pick up Sophie from school? Who is going to be here when Jacob gets off the bus?" "I have my content creation schedule. Richard has clients. We can't just drop everything." Her voice was rising, laced with a familiar tone of accusation. The unspoken contract was being violated, and she was furious. I tried to stay calm, to be reasonable. "I thought we could figure it out," I said, my own voice betraying my nervousness. "We could look into after-school care, or maybe a part-time babysitter. With my salary, I can help pay for it." The suggestion was met with synchronized scoffs of disbelief. "A babysitter," Brenda repeated, her voice laced with venom. "Why on earth would we pay a stranger when we have you? This is your family, Kelly. You help the family." "This isn't helping, it's a full-time job," I countered, my voice finally rising to meet hers. "I've been doing it for almost 10 years. I have a right to my own life, to start my own career." Richard stood up, taking on his role as the disappointed patriarch. "A right. You have a roof over your head, food on the table, a college education we paid for. That's what you have. Your right is to show some gratitude and contribute." The gratitude card, it was their trump card, the one they played every time I pushed back. But this time, it felt different. This time, I had an alternative. I had an escape route. My contribution is getting a job so I can support myself and move out, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. That was always the plan. The silence that followed as heavy and cold. Brenda's face, usually arranged in a soft, camera-ready smile, was a mask of cold fury. "Move out," she whispered, as if I'd spoken the most obscene profanity. "You would abandon your family, your little brother and sister who adore you, for some stupid little office job?" The cruelty of her words stung, but the injustice of them fueled my resolve. "It's not a stupid little job, it's my career, the one you supposedly supported me through college for. Or was that just for show?" "So you could tell all your friends your daughter was in college?" Richard stepped between us. "That's enough," he boomed. "You're being incredibly selfish and ungrateful, Kelly. Here's how this is going to work. You can either turn down this little job and continue to do your duty to this family, or you can find somewhere else to live. We will not harbor a freeloader who refuses to pull her weight." An ultimatum. It was so stark, so brutal that it took my breath away. He was drawing a line in the sand, my family or my future, my role as their servant or my identity as a person. The choice was terrifying, but in my heart it wasn't a choice at all. I had been dreaming of this moment for a decade. I looked from his cold, determined face to my mother's furious one. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a rebellious employee, and they were ready to fire me. "Fine," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll leave." Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp, half scoff. "Don't be so dramatic. Where would you even go?" she sneered, confident that I had nowhere. "I'll figure it out," I said, turning to walk away before they could see the tears welling in my eyes. Richard's voice stopped me at the stairs. "If you walk out that door, don't expect a cent from us. The car we let you use stays here. The phone plan we pay for gets cut off. You'll be on your own. Truly." That night, I didn't sleep. I packed. I stuffed clothes into garbage bags, boxed up my art supplies and my textbooks, and dismantled my room piece by piece. Every object held a memory of a life I was now being forced to leave. In a small, dark corner of my heart, I had hoped they would come to my door, that my mother would apologize, that Richard would say he'd gone too far. But the only sound was the murmur of the TV downstairs. The next morning, I called Liam, my voice cracking as I explained what had happened. He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way. Pack everything you can. You can stay with me for as long as you need." When Liam's truck pulled into the driveway, my parents were waiting. They stood on the porch, arms crossed, like two guards overseeing an eviction. They watched in stony silence as Liam and I hauled my life out of their house. I didn't say goodbye to Jacob and Sophie. They were at school, and my parents had made it clear I wasn't welcome to wait. It was the cruelest cut of all. As we drove away, I looked back at the perfect house with its perfectly manicured lawn. I had never felt so alone or so free. The door had slammed shut behind me, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I would never be welcome there again. The first few weeks of freedom were a chaotic blend of terror and exhilaration. Liam was a lifesaver. He lived in a small two-bedroom apartment, and he immediately cleared out his spare room, which had been a glorified storage space for his old computer parts and workout equipment. "It's not much, but it's yours," he'd said, and to me, it felt like a palace. I slept on an air mattress for the first week, surrounded by boxes and bags, but I slept more soundly than I had in years. I started my new job at Innovate Creative, and it was everything I had hoped for. The work was challenging, my colleagues were welcoming, and for the first time, I felt like I was being judged on my talent and work ethic, not my willingness to perform domestic labor. I bought a cheap, used car with the small amount of savings I had squirreled away and got a new phone plan. I was building a life from scratch, and it was terrifyingly, wonderfully empowering. My parents, true to their word, cut me off completely. My calls went to voicemail, my texts were left unread. It hurt, a deep, aching pain in my chest, but it also solidified my resolve. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. One evening, about a month after I'd moved out, Liam and I were eating pizza on the floor of his living room when curiosity got the better of me. I hadn't looked at my mother's social media since I'd left. I didn't want to see the happy family photos, to feel that familiar sting of being the outsider. But I needed to know. I pulled up her profile. It was exactly as I'd expected. She had spun my departure into a triumphant narrative. There was a long, syrupy post with a photo of her, Richard, Jacob, and Sophie, all beaming. The caption read, "It's been a whirlwind of a month. Our eldest, Kelly, has bravely flown the nest to start her adult life. We are so incredibly proud of her independence and can't wait to see all she accomplishes. For now, we're adjusting to a quieter house and cherishing these precious moments with the little ones. Empty nester practice proud parents, family is forever." I felt sick. Bravely flown the nest, I read aloud to Liam, my voice dripping with sarcasm. They kicked me out with nothing but the clothes on my back. Liam peered over my shoulder. Of course she spun it that way. Her entire brand is perfect family. She can't exactly post, "Kicked out my free nanny for wanting a career," can she? Unblessed. His attempt at humor made me smile, but the bitterness remained. The comments were even worse. "Such a wonderful family. You raised her right. It's so hard when they leave, but so rewarding." I was about to close the app when another post caught my eye. It was from a week earlier. A photo of my mother and Richard, dressed to the nines, clinking champagne glasses at a fancy restaurant. The caption was about celebrating Richard's latest, massive success in real estate. "So proud of my amazing husband for closing the huge Henderson deal. Your hard work inspires me every day. Treating ourselves to a well-deserved night out. Real estate mogul power couple success." Something about the post felt off. The Henderson deal? I remembered Richard talking about it for months. It was a massive commercial property development that he claimed would set them up for life. He had been obsessed with it, working late, constantly on the phone. But I also remembered him coming home one night, about 2 weeks before I was kicked out, looking utterly defeated. He was quiet and angry, and I'd overheard him on the phone in his office, saying something about how the deal had imploded and the investors had pulled out at the last second. He'd been in a foul mood for days afterward, so why were they celebrating it now? I scrolled back further, looking for clues. And then I saw it. Another post from 3 weeks ago, just a week after I'd left. It was a picture of a brand new luxury SUV with a giant red bow on it, parked in our old driveway. Brenda's caption was gushing. "Surprise from the hubby. To celebrate my growing platform and all my hard work, Richard decided I needed an upgrade. I'm speechless. What an incredible man. Best husband, new car, influencer life." Liam whistled. "That's a $60,000 car, easy. How did he afford that if this huge deal he was banking on fell through?" My mind started racing, connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there. My parents had always lived a little bit beyond their means, obsessed with keeping up appearances. The country club membership they barely used, the designer clothes Brenda wore in her posts, the expensive vacations they took while I stayed home with the kids. I had always assumed Richard's commission checks covered it all, but maybe they didn't. Maybe the Henderson deal falling through was a much bigger catastrophe than I'd realized. Maybe their perfect life was a house of cards. "Liam," I said slowly, an idea starting to form in my mind. "Richard handles all the finances. My mom, she's not clueless, but she trusts him completely. She just enjoys the spending." "So you think he lied to her about the deal?" Liam asked, grabbing another slice of pizza. "I think he lied to everyone," I replied. "But why? And more importantly, where did the money for that car come from?" The question hung in the air between us. The perfect facade my parents presented to the world had always seemed impenetrable. But now I had found a crack. A tiny hairline fracture, but it was there. My departure, my refusal to be their unpaid servant, must have put immense pressure on them. They would have had to hire help, or Brenda would have to actually parent full-time, which would cut into her content creation. That would cost money. Money they apparently had to spare for a new luxury car, but not for a babysitter. It didn't add up. There was a story here, a secret hidden behind the filters and hashtags. They had thrown me away to protect their perfect image, to maintain their comfortable lifestyle. They had built their gilded cage with my unpaid labor, and when I broke free, they simply patched the hole and pretended I'd flown away on my own. A cold, hard anger began to replace the hurt in my heart. They hadn't just kicked me out, they had built their life on a foundation of lies, and I was going to be the one to expose it. For the first time since leaving, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a detective, and I had just found my first clue. The next few weeks were a deep dive into a rabbit hole I never could have imagined. My mission became an obsession, fueled by a potent cocktail of anger and a newfound sense of justice. I started with what I knew. Richard was a real estate agent, and a lot of property information is public record. I spent my evenings after work on the county clerk's website, cross-referencing names, ND dates, trying to piece together the truth about the Henderson deal. As I suspected, there was no record of a recent sale for that property. In fact, public records showed it had been sold to a different development corporation, one Richard's firm had no affiliation with 3 months ago. He hadn't just lost the deal, he had never been close to closing it. The champagne celebration was a complete fabrication, a performance for my mother and her online audience. This discovery was the key that unlocked everything else. If he was lying about his biggest professional achievement, what else was he lying about? The answer, I suspected, was money. My parents had 2 joint bank accounts and several credit cards. I didn't have the passwords, but growing up in that house, I had become an expert observer. I knew the answers to their security questions: his mother's maiden name, the street he grew up on, the name of his first pet. It felt like a massive invasion of privacy, but I reminded myself that they had invaded my entire life for the last decade. This was a necessary evil. Taking a deep breath, I tried logging into their main credit card account. I guessed the password on the 3rd try. It was a combination of his college mascot and the year they got married. The page loaded, and my jaw dropped. The balance was staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars in debt spread across multiple high-interest cards. I scrolled through the statements, my eyes widening with every line item. There were thousands spent on designer clothes from boutiques my mother loved, charges from high-end restaurants and resorts, a recurring payment for the country club membership, and of course, the down payment for the brand-new SUV. They were living like millionaires, but the numbers told a different story. They were drowning. There was no way Richard's salary as a real estate agent, especially in a fluctuating market, could sustain this level of spending. So where was the money coming from? Or rather, where did they think it was going to come from? The Henderson deal. He had been banking on that massive commission to wipe out their debt and keep the fantasy alive. When it fell through, instead of admitting defeat and cutting back, he doubled down on the lie. He bought my mother a car to keep her happy and clueless, and celebrated a non-existent victory. It was reckless, arrogant, and incredibly stupid, but it still didn't explain everything. They were making minimum payments on the cards, just enough to keep them active. There had to be another source of income or another secret. I enlisted Liam's help. His tech skills were far beyond mine, and he was invested now, acting as my partner in crime. "This is better than any TV show," he'd said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. I told him about a private folder I knew Richard kept on the family's desktop computer. He always called it his family finances folder, and it was password protected. He told me once it was where he kept copies of important documents for emergencies. I had a hunch the real emergency was hiding inside it. Liam walked me through the process of accessing the home network remotely. It took a few tries, but we finally bypassed the security protocols. We were in. We found the folder, and Liam worked his magic on the password protection. Inside were scanned documents, tax returns, loan applications, and bank statements. It was a treasure trove of deceit. The first thing I noticed was on the mortgage application for the house, which they had refinanced 2 years ago. On the application, under other dependents, he had listed me. That wasn't unusual. But under my name, he had listed me as disabled, claiming I was unable to work and was entirely dependent on their care. He had fabricated medical documents, fake doctor's notes and diagnoses, to support the claim. This lie had not only secured them a more favorable loan modification, but as I dug deeper, I found he had also been claiming disability tax credits for me for the last 2 years. He was committing tax fraud using a fake disability I didn't have. I felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just used my time and labor, he had used my very identity to steal from the government. But the worst was yet to come. I opened a subfolder labeled Grandma Eleanor. Eleanor was Richard's mother. She had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness. She had been a sweet, kind woman who had always been especially warm to me. Before she died, she had pulled me aside and told me that she had set up a trust fund for me to be given to me on my 25th birthday. It wasn't a huge amount, she'd said, but enough to help me get a start in life. Don't let your mother and Richard talk you out of using it for yourself, she had warned, a knowing look in her weary eyes. I hadn't thought about it in years. Inside the folder was a document I had never seen before. It was a power of attorney form, supposedly signed by me, giving Rick hard full control over my finances and assets, including the inheritance from my grandmother. My signature was on the bottom, but it wasn't my signature. It was a forgery, and a good one at that. He had drained the trust fund, every last cent. The statements were all there, showing a systematic transfer of funds from my trust into their joint account over the past 2 years. The vacations, the designer bags, the country club, it had all been paid for with my inheritance. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. This went beyond selfishness and exploitation. This was criminal. He had stolen my future to finance their present. He had used my name to commit fraud. All while my mother smiled for her phone camera, preaching about the importance of family first. The rage I felt was so pure and so intense it almost felt calm. The hurt was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had robbed me. They had built their entire perfect life on a foundation of lies, fraud, and theft, my theft. They thought they had gotten rid of the one person who could expose them. They had no idea they had just created the one person with the motive, the means, and the will to burn it all to the ground. Liam looked at me, his face grim. Kelly, this is serious. Like, go to jail serious. I nodded slowly, my mind already working, the pieces of a plan beginning to click into place. I know, I said, my voice steady, and they deserve every bit of what's coming to them. The 2 weeks leading up to the confrontation were the most meticulously planned of my life. My grief had crystallized into a diamond-hard purpose. This was no longer just about revenge for being kicked out. It was about justice for years of exploitation, fraud, and theft. My career in graphic design had taught me the importance of presentation, of telling a story visually. Now, I would use those skills to tell the truest story of all, the story of my parents' deception. My plan had 2 phases. The first was gathering and organizing the evidence into an undeniable, irrefutable format. The second was choosing the perfect stage on which to present it. Liam was my co-conspirator, my tech department, and my moral support. We spent our evenings huddled over his kitchen table, which had become our war room. We downloaded and encrypted every fraudulent document. The forged power of attorney, the fake disability papers, the doctored loan applications, the credit card statements showing the transfer of my inheritance, and the public records proving the Henderson deal was a fantasy. I didn't just save the files, I curated them. I used my design skills to create a clean, professional-looking presentation. Each piece of evidence was laid out on a slide with clear, concise annotations explaining its significance. I created timelines, flowcharts showing the movement of money from my trust fund to their credit card bills, and side-by-side comparisons of their lavish social media posts next to the damning financial data. It was a masterpiece of organized chaos, a beautiful and terrible portfolio of their lies. For every photo of Brenda hashtagging blessed on a tropical beach, there was a bank statement showing the vacation was paid for with my grandmother's money. For Richard's post about his power couple success, there was the public record showing the deal had never happened. I was building a case, not just an accusation. While I assembled the evidence, I also took a crucial legal step. I consulted with a lawyer Liam knew through his paralegal work. I showed her a summarized, anonymous version of the case. Her eyes widened as I explained the situation. She confirmed what Liam and I suspected. This was multiple felonies: forgery, tax fraud, wire fraud. She advised me to gather all the original evidence I could, make multiple secure backups, and that I had an incredibly strong civil and criminal case. The consultation solidified my resolve. I wasn't just being vengeful, I was a victim of a crime, and I was taking my power back. The second phase of the plan was choosing the venue for the reveal. It had to be public, but controlled. It had to be a place where their image mattered most, where the fall from grace would be the most spectacular. And then I saw it, an invitation on my mother's social media page. She was hosting her annual charity fundraiser dinner party. It was her Super Bowl. For one night, their house was transformed into a showcase of her supposed generosity and class. She invited all of their friends, the other real estate agents, the neighborhood wives, the members of the country club, and a few local micro-celebrities and business owners she wanted to impress. It was the apex of her performance, the one night where all her online posturing was meant to manifest as real-world admiration. It was perfect. Getting in would be the easy part. My name was still on the master guest list from years past. She would leave. Think to remove it, assuming I would never have the audacity to show up. The centerpiece of my plan was a slideshow. I compiled my presentation into a video format set to somber, dramatic music. It was designed to be played on a large screen. I knew they always rented a projector and a large screen to display a loop of photos from the charity they were supporting. That was my way in. Liam, my tech wizard, devised a simple, elegant solution. He bought a small, discreet device that could hijack a wireless video signal. As long as we were on the same Wi-Fi network, he could override whatever was playing on the projector and stream my presentation directly from his laptop, which he would operate from his truck parked a block away. All I had to do was get inside, ensure the projector was connected to the Wi-Fi, and give him the signal. The signal would be a simple text. Now. The day of the party, I was a bundle of nerves and ice-cold determination. I bought a simple, elegant black dress, the kind of thing I could never have afforded before my new job. It was a suit of armor. I did my hair and makeup, not to impress them, but to look at them as an equal, not as the child they had cast out. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman who was about to dismantle her own family to save herself. Before I left, I did one more thing. I packaged all the evidence, every document, every screenshot, every bank statement, onto a secure flash drive. I wrote a cover letter, a simple, factual account of what Richard had done, and addressed the package to the lead fraud detective at the local police department. I also addressed a copy to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I wouldn't mail them until after the party. This wasn't just about public humiliation, it was about real legal consequences. As I drove to my old house, my hands were steady on the wheel. I passed all the familiar landmarks of a life that no longer felt like mine. When I pulled up to the curb, I could see the house was ablaze with light, cars lining the street. Music and laughter spilled out from the open windows. It was showtime. I took one last deep breath, sent Liam a text that just said, "Here, ready," and got out of the car. I walked up the stone path to the front door, a ghost returning to her haunting ground, and prepared to give the performance of a lifetime. The moment I stepped through the front door, a hush fell over the immediate vicinity of the foyer. A few of my parents' friends, people who had known me my whole life, stared with wide, surprised eyes. They knew the official story, that I had flown the nest, but my unannounced appearance at my mother's crowning social event clearly wasn't part of that narrative. I smiled politely, a calm, cool expression I had practiced in the mirror, and made my way through the crowd. The house was decorated to perfection, of course. White linens, flickering candles, and the scent of expensive flowers filled the air. My mother, Brenda, was holding court in the center of the living room, a glass of champagne in her hand, laughing at something one of her influencer friends said. She was radiant, dressed in a sparkling gown, the queen in her castle. She hadn't seen me yet. Richard was by the bar, schmoozing with a group of men, likely potential clients. He was in his element, projecting an aura of confidence and success. They were so blissfully unaware, so wrapped up in their own performance, that they had left the stage wide open for me. I located my target, the large projector screen set up at one end of the living room. As I'd predicted, it was cycling through a series of heartwarming photos of children from the charity. I casually walked past the small table holding the projector and a laptop, and with a sleight-of-hand maneuver I'd practiced a dozen times, I made sure the Wi-Fi connection was active. Everything was in place. I found a quiet corner, pulled out my phone, and texted Liam, "We are live. Wait for my signal." He responded instantly. Standing by, break a leg. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and began to circulate, making brief, polite conversation with people I knew. To anyone who asked, I simply said, "Oh, I wouldn't miss my mother's big night for the world." The surprise on their faces was immensely satisfying. Finally, my mother spotted me. Her smile froze, the warmth in her eyes instantly evaporating to be replaced by a flash of panic and then fury. She gracefully excused herself and stalked towards me, her movements tight and angry. "Kelly, what are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous, while her face remained arranged in a pleasant social mask. "I was invited, wasn't I?" I replied sweetly, gesturing vaguely to the room. "It's a party for a good cause, I wanted to support it." Richard had seen her beeline for me and was now approaching, his own expression a thundercloud. "This is a private event," he said, his voice a low growl. "Yo. You are not welcome here. I suggest you leave quietly." "Oh, I'll be leaving," I said, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for the few people nearby to overhear. "But not before I make a donation." This was it. I raised my voice, projecting it across the suddenly quieting room. "Excuse me, everyone, can I have your attention for just a moment?" Heads turned. The music seemed to dip in volume. My parents froze, trapped between their desire to throw me out and their need to maintain their composure in front of their guests. "My name is Kelly, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Brenda and Richard's daughter." I smiled warmly, a predator baring its teeth. "I am so incredibly proud of the life my parents have built, a life of success, integrity, and family values. They are an inspiration, and tonight I'd like to make a special tribute to them, to show you all the truth of their incredible journey." Brenda's eyes were pleading with me to stop, her face pale. Richard looked like he was about to physically drag me out. But it was too late. All eyes were on me. I held up my phone and sent the text to Liam. "Now." The heartwarming photos on the projector screen flickered and went black. A second later, a new image appeared, the title slide I had designed. It read, "The Price of Perfection, a Tribute." A low, ominous piece of classical music began to play. The room fell silent. The first slide was a beautiful, filtered photo from my mother's social media of the family in front of our house. Then it transitioned to a scanned image of the fraudulent mortgage application, with the section where Richard had declared me disabled highlighted in red. A gasp rippled through the room. The next slide showed the forged doctor's notes he'd submitted. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. Richard's face was ashen. He started moving towards the projector, but a few of his colleagues put a hand on his arm, their faces a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. The slideshow continued, a relentless, systematic destruction of their entire reality. The screen showed their gushing post about the Henderson deal, immediately followed by the public property records proving it was a lie. It showed the picture of the new SUV, followed by the credit card statements showing their staggering debt. And then came the finale. The screen displayed a photo of my sweet, smiling grandmother, Eleanor. Then it cut to the forged power of attorney, with my forged signature blown up for all to see. Beside it, I displayed the bank statements, a waterfall of transactions showing the systematic draining of my trust fund. A flowchart appeared, a red line tracing the money from my inheritance directly to charges for their vacations, Brenda's designer clothes, and their country club dues. The last slide was a simple sentence in stark white letters on a black screen. My entire inheritance was stolen to fund this life. The music ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. Every single guest was staring, not at the screen, but at my parents. Their friends, their colleagues, their neighbors, their entire curated audience. Their faces were masks of shock, disgust, and betrayal. Brenda looked completely broken, her perfect facade shattered into a million pieces. Richard stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his own world burn down. I turned to face them, my voice no longer loud, but clear and cutting in the silence. "So, to my parents," I said, raising my glass of water in a toast. "Thank you for teaching me the value of hard work and honesty. You've given me so much." I took a small sip, then placed the glass down on a nearby table. Without another word, I turned and walked through the stunned, silent crowd. No one tried to stop me. I walked out the front door, into the cool night air, and didn't look back. The performance was over. The consequences were just beginning. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a slow, systematic collapse. I didn't stick around to watch the immediate fallout of the party, but the shockwaves reached me soon enough. Liam told me that according to a friend of his who had been catering the event, the party had dispersed in almost complete silence within 15 minutes of my departure. Guests had slipped out, avoiding eye contact with Brenda and Richard, their hushed whispers following them out the door. My parents were left standing alone in their beautifully decorated living room, surrounded by the ruins of their reputation. The next morning, I mailed the packages to the police and the IRS. That was my final act. The rest was out of my hands. The first public sign of the collapse was my mother's social media. Her accounts went dark. For 2 days, there was nothing. Then, her profiles were scrubbed clean. Every photo, every post, every hashtagged lie disappeared, leaving behind a blank. Empty page. Her career as a lifestyle influencer was over before she could even post a tearful, non-apology apology. The real-world consequences were even more severe. Richard was fired from his real estate firm within the week. The story of his fraud, especially cheating his own stepdaughter out of her inheritance, had ripped through the local business community. No one wanted to be associated with him. His professional reputation, the bedrock of his career, had been annihilated in a single evening. Legal troubles followed swiftly. About a month later, I was contacted by a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. My package had indeed been opened. I went to the station and gave a formal statement, walking them through the evidence I had compiled. I felt strangely detached, clinical, as I laid out the years of deceit. 2 weeks after that, Richard was arrested. He was charged with forgery, multiple counts of fraud, and tax evasion. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly their carefully hidden secrets were public knowledge. Local real estate agent arrested for defrauding stepdaughter, the headline read. Seeing his mugshot on the news website was a surreal moment. He looked like a stranger, a tired, defeated old man. The financial collapse was total. Without Richard's income and facing insurmountable legal fees, they were forced to sell the house. All the possessions they had accumulated to project an image of wealth, the new SUV, the designer furniture, my mother's extensive wardrobe, were sold off to pay their debts and legal bills. They lost the country club membership, the friends who had admired their success, and the status they had sacrificed everything to maintain. Last I heard, they were renting a small apartment in a town 30 miles away. The great irony was that in their desperate attempt to avoid paying for childcare, they had ended up losing everything. The cost of a part-time babysitter would have been infinitesimal compared to the price they ultimately paid. Amidst the chaos of their lives, I felt a profound sense of peace. My life, in stark contrast, was building. My job at Innovate Creative was going wonderfully. I was promoted from junior designer to a full-time graphic designer after just 6 months. My boss praised my creativity and dedication, and I was finally earning enough to be truly independent. I moved out of Liam's spare room and into my own small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, was something I had earned myself. Liam remained my rock, my closest friend who had been there through the darkest moments. Our friendship, forged in a crisis, had become one of the most important things in my life. I did not file a civil suit against them. The criminal case was enough. My lawyer informed me that as part of Richard's eventual plea deal, he was ordered to pay full restitution for the trust fund he had stolen. The money, when it eventually started coming in small, court-ordered installments, felt less like a victory and more like a sad postscript. It could never repay what was truly taken from me. The biggest question was what would happen to Jacob and Sophie. For a while, I had no contact. Then, one day, I received a call from a social worker. Brenda was struggling to cope and had been deemed an unfit guardian in her current state. My half-siblings were temporarily placed in foster care. My heart broke for them. They were the innocent victims in all of this. After much soul-searching and long conversations with Liam, I made a decision. I petitioned the court for temporary guardianship. They were my brother and sister, and they didn't deserve to pay for our parents' mistakes. It wasn't easy, but I won. Jacob and Sophie came to live with me in my small apartment. It was a huge adjustment, but seeing them, really seeing them, away from the toxic environment of that house was a revelation. They were just kids who needed stability and love. I was finally able to be their sister, not their keeper. My life became a chaotic but happy mix of design projects, school runs, and bedtime stories. I was giving them the childhood I had missed out on my own terms. My parents destroyed my past, but in doing so, they gave me an unexpected future. I am no longer defined by their lies or their expectations. I am a designer, a friend, a survivor, and now, a sister in the truest sense of the word. I am free. And in the quiet moments, after the kids are asleep and the apartment is still, I know that my grandmother, Alina, would be proud.